Hello and welcome to this wonderful webinar. We have a powerhouse of brainiac women from around the world. They're experts in their respective fields. This is one of 6 panel discussions that is part of the Women in AI Forum. And we're going to be discussing dignity and appropriate adoption of AI. With that, I'm going to introduce the speakers that we have today, starting with Amy. Amy Reigada is a Senior Data Solutions Program Lead at Baywa Global, and she has over 13 years of experience as a business intelligence executive, strengthening business models by adapting and driving data strategy to corporate vision. As a strategist with deep data acumen, she gracefully drives large-scale, complex, and highly technical projects to successful completion. Amy, where are you based out of, and how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Really happy to be here. I'm originally from Costa Rica, but I'm actually in Leipzig, near to Berlin, in Germany, and I've been here for the last 5 to 6 years.
Next is Titilola Olojede. Titilola is a lecturer of philosophy at the National Open University of Nigeria. She is a member of the Ethical AI Advisory Council of the Center for Practical Bioethics. She has contributed broadly across the spectrum of social advocacy for women and children, and she has been named 100 Brilliant Women in AI Ethics. Titilola, pleasure to have you. Where are you calling from, and how are you doing?
Thank you very much, Joaquin. I'm calling from Nigeria, Abuja precisely. That's the capital, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure to have you. Jessica Price, you're next. Jessica Price is Senior Technical Editor at AWS. She has led conversational design for Amazon Q and is the AI subject matter expert for the AWS Style Guide for Generative AI. She is part of the AI Lab, an internal group that helps members of her organization create AI demos for internal tools. And where are you calling from, and how are you doing?
Calling from Seattle, Washington, and I'm doing great. Really glad to be here.
Nancy Steedle.
Steidle.
Steidle. Pardon me. Nancy Steidle. She is an international business consultant and intellectual property law specialist with a focus on AI. Her practice is called the Business Mission, and she's originally from Canada, but she's been in the UK for the past 25 years. She is well accomplished in the realm of academic endeavors, getting her third master's, and applying it to real world scenarios for businesses across a spectrum of sizes. Pleasure to have you, Nancy. Where are you calling from, and how are you doing?
Well, thank you very much, Joaquin, for having us on your show, and hopefully this, this forum will educate people more. I'm very honored to be with the other ladies in this forum as well, and build with lots of knowledge and expertise as well. I'm in the UK, as you mentioned. I'm Canadian, so you can see that I don't have a huge British accent. But I'm really excited to get the show on the road, and hopefully we will be able to exchange very informative information to everybody.
Fair enough. I think that merits the first question for the panel discussion. Where are we today with the adoption of AI technologies? And perhaps we should start with Amy and go down alphabetically from there.
Sure thing. I think right now it's a little bit crazy. Slowly it's getting better, but I remember when this hype started, everybody wanted to jump on the AI train. They didn't care how, when, with which tool. It's just like, I need a chatbot. I'm the CEO. I need it now because I need to look cool in front of the other companies, right? And this is quite complex because they didn't take in consideration most of the companies, an AI ethical framework or anything. Yesterday I was in Berlin in an AI conference, and there was quite interesting key takeaway from yesterday, that it was highlighted that only 1 out of 5 companies has an ethical framework for AI. and then basically the others are not doing it. So the risk of having data leakage, like some hackers doing crazy stuff there, stealing information from customers or from employees, it's really high. However, also I have noticed in the last 2, 3 conferences I've been online and also in person in the last weeks, is that there is at least 1 or 2 talks about ethical AI and security, cybersecurity with AI, and all those topics. So I think slowly it's coming to the picture, but what we have right now, I don't think is the best.
Jessica, would you like to take over from there?
Sure. Yeah, I think what's interesting about generative AI is it's a technology that jumped really fast from academia and R&D departments to mass adoption a lot faster than I think we normally see new technologies get there. I mean, we went from this is all papers on archive.org to I can go online and use an LLM to generate character names for my home D&D game like that. It was so fast. And so I think, I mean, ethics always lags behind the development of the technology, unfortunately. Like, yeah, for-profit companies don't like to be slowed down. And so, I mean, that's always an issue we face, but I think with AI, it's really pointed just because of that speed. And also because this doesn't work like the technology we're used to using, right? If it does something unexpected, we can't just pop the hood, find the offending line of code and fix it. I mean, the way that generative AI works is a little more of a black box. So not only did it move really fast, but also we don't have the same transparency into what it's doing that we do with most technology.
Nancy?
So I'm going to be coming in with sort of the intellectual property law perspective of it. So I think the adoption of AI technologies really has spurred that significant interest and challenge. So as at the moment with IP, animals and robots cannot own the IP. So as AI becomes more, involved in various industries, the question arises about what is the ownership and who owns it and what kind of protection is part of this AI generated innovation. So IP laws are trying to adapt and address the unique aspects of AI generated creations, such as whether AI can be considered an inventor and who owns those rights to AI generated work.
Titi Lola?
Yeah. I think that in terms of ethics, we have quite a number of regulations and proposals, both from international organizations like the UN, like UNESCO, and also from non-profit organizations and various stakeholders. We have lots of proposals on the ethics. For example, the UNESCO guideline on the ethics of AI of 2021 was adopted by 193 countries. But if we look at the implementation, not quite many countries are implementing them. So at this point, I would think that it's time to walk the talk, enough of coming up with various ethical regulations, but that we also need to find a way to get people to adhere to them. We need to find a way to get implementation going so that they are not just up there without and developers, tech companies, organizations, they are doing business as usual. Because as it seems, if I should put it mildly, that innovation is outpacing regulation. But with the regulations we have on board, it's time to do something more than just putting them in the books or in the libraries or on the web, but to getting people to really adhere to them so that we all could reap the goods of AI and have it enduring in our lives. Without it, altering our lives in ways that may not be agreeable to us as such.
Great points all around, and I'm happy to get that diversity of perspective from the technical, social, and ethical realms. Let me ask this: uh, what are the ethical considerations of AI technology? Do we just let for-profit companies develop all these synthetic actors and bring us into a idealistic utopian society where robots will service us, or what should we be thinking about in this wild wild west esque era of AI adoption?
Yeah, I think that the problem is right now, as AI as it is today, right? There is also a lot of companies, also some insights that I got yesterday that is really true, are either not mature, but they are without regulation and just releasing a lot of AI products there without, thinking on these kind of topics. And that means that many AI systems are exhibiting biases because they are training on representative data sets, and this leads to unfair outcomes. There is also no transparency when you do AI decision making processes because, basically it makes it difficult for the users to understand how decisions are made for certain systems internally, sometimes for companies. And privacy, as I mentioned before, I think is one of the huge problems with the ethics as well. And then the security, of course, of the AI systems because are more targeted for cyber attacks. And I think those are one of the ethical considerations you should take in. You should basically draft before starting to implement something. And I seen that, for example, last year I drove AI workshop for the C levels at my previous company to get them into the FOMO, for the AI. Honestly, I really didn't want to do it in that way, but I was kind of pushed to bring it to them with different use cases that we had there. And of course, they were super hype and everything. And then they wanted to extend these workshops to the directors. And then I brought a very known person in Europe, that she does very good workshops and also talks about AI and AI strategy. I also have these kind of workshops as well. And the thing is, like, we did some things together. We talk about, okay, let's find the right use case. We cannot, walk before run, and we need to define these kind of things: transparency, accountability, autonomy, security, blah blah blah. And we kind of draft a whole strategy with people from different teams who wanted to use AI. Really easy, no code. It's just a strategy. And at the end of the workshop, I sent a survey just to see how they, were into it. It was around 3 hours or something. And it was surprised because a lot of people said, I think this was useful because everybody knows that. And that's so simple. And I don't know, this is kind of a waste of time because it was 3 hours and we all know this and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay, if you know that, so why we are not doing that? And we are just jumping into the first thing we see there, right? And using customer data and stuff without any, regulation. So you see, people doesn't like to be told what to do some way, somehow. And they don't want to accept that there is many risks. They just want to jump and be the next big thing, in certain industry, just because they are using AI.
I think the question of how does AI and ethics intersect, that's such a big question. And it gets really hard to talk about because there is so much hype, right? It gets very hard to deal in reality rather than there's actually a phenomenon, the Skynet phenomenon, where AI experts have difficulty talking to policymakers and stuff because they're well, is Skynet going to happen, right? Skynet from the Terminator movies. Are we going to have an AI that rules the world and has access to weapons platforms? And it's that's not what we're dealing with. If you bring up Skynet in a conversation about this, I know you're not a serious person. The harms are much more potentially mundane and they can happen in a lot of different areas, but we have to deal in reality. And both people who are very enthusiastic about AI and people who are very skeptical or afraid of AI tend to talk about it in these almost like cinematic terms that make it real hard to deal with like the actual data and the actual day-to-day of like what can these systems do and how are they being implemented. I think part of the problem is in the pop culture consciousness. We're treating LLMs like they're AGI. LLMs, large language models, like they're artificial general intelligence, like they can think like a human. They can't, right? Like it's a tool, and a tool can be very, very dangerous, but like we can't talk realistically about what we should and shouldn't do with the tool if we don't actually deal in like the reality of what it can and can't do. And so it makes it really hard to have a lot of these conversations because the hype level is so high. Like no matter how you feel about AI, the hype is like off the charts. So
yeah, I think from the ethical considerations in the AI intersection within intellectual property law, there's particularly the issues of fairness and accountability, and what Amy said is the transparency. So when it comes to protecting intellectual property while ensuring the ethical use of AI, there involves a real balance of innovation with principle, such as respecting that privacy and avoid being biased in algorithms, and just overall promoting transparency in your AI decision making processes.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take off from there. Talking about algorithm, um, I was at a keynote address yesterday. I was at a conference where somebody gave the keynote yesterday. And in the course of his presentation, all the slides had one picture at least, and all the pictures were men. Only one of the slides had the picture of a woman. So I got really curious, like, was it inadvertent? How come this keynote was dominated by pictures of men? So during the Q&A, I asked a question and said, I'm very curious as to what happened. The keynote address was on philosophy, and I said, is it the paucity of women in AI that has, because you're talking AI, that has made you to put all men on your slide? Or is it because of the history of philosophy that has been, that has discountenanced the contributions of women to philosophy that you're trying to rehash or something? Because I'm not quite sure why all your slides were dominated by men. And he was very gracious and very apologetic that what happened was that he put on AI on he used AI to generate the images, and all he imputed was philosophers, and he brought in tons of men.
Oh
So the points
no.
I'm trying to underscore is the bias in the world that AI systems, AI algorithms are replicating, that we need conscious efforts to make sure that it doesn't reverse the winds of equality and equity, the works that sustainable development goals are achieving and the likes. The other angle I want to look at it from is from the angle of techno solutionism, and I think it speaks to the idea of hype. Solutionism, optimism, chauvinism, in which we think that all aspects of our lives should be ruled by AI. I cite another example. There's a friend, well, remote friend, online friends, who were meant to collaborate on a paper, and I had written a 141 word abstract. So I sent it to her to review. And the kind of feedback she gave me, I knew from the word go that this wasn't from her, that this was AI generated. So I was like, in the spirit of transparency, could you tell me which AI tool you employed in generating this? Initially, she ignored the question and answered all of the things I was asking her. So I insisted, and she said, perplexity. And it was very concerning to me because I thought this is just a 141 word abstract, not up to the 250 word standard. And if in such few word abstracts, you couldn't look at it and give me concrete feedback. Then there is a problem. And having used AI to generate it, you also did not, declare that this wasn't mine, but I used this. I said it's concerning, and I'm really very careful having to collaborate on a paper with you, because it's somehow indirectly telling me that you might not write the paper yourself, and you might just give it to AI and we are caught, or something. At least that doesn't speak of integrity. And so the point I'm trying to underscore is not to bring anyone down, but to say that, yeah, AI is good, it's beneficial, it helps in our work, but we should use it as collaborative tool and not hand over all of our lives or things we are doing to it. Because invariably, somehow, there are skills we get to hone. There are skills we also develop when we task our brains. And so, if we relinquish all of our works, mental works especially, to AI, we might just be experiencing some mental atrophy. Our critical thinking ability might just be diminishing. So it's good to know where to draw the line between what you would want AI do for you and what you would rather do by yourself, or at least begin the process by yourself, so that you don't relinquish all of your humanity, all of your mental power, mental acumen to AI.
That is an interesting perspective, and this is a notion, a thought that has kind of surfaced in several of these conversations I've been having, where the more power or the smarter the tools that you employ, the dumber or the less informed the user of that tool. It's kind of like a parasitic siphoning of intelligence, and that's a
Mhm.
something to lament. It's meant to empower our natural intelligence so we can be able to do more, not impair us and give us the facility to think less.
I
Um,
mean, I do want to say that, like, I worry about knowledge collapse, right? Like, I worry about a lot of things that could happen because of this. But also, um, I don't know that I worry that much about atrophy because, I mean, number one, they can't currently actually substitute for a person, right? That is not a capability that this tool currently has. If you try and use it in that way, you're going to end up disappointed. Like, I don't know that you can work with these models for that long and think that they don't need a lot of human supervision. But what's exciting to me is, like, I'm not a programmer, right? Like, I'm not a coder, um, but I can frequently use an LLM to, like, spit out some code. I usually run it by an engineer friend first, and I'm like, this isn't going to break anything if I try it, right? But that's specialization, right? And that's how civilization is built, right? If we all have to know everything in depth, we don't live long enough to know every field in depth. And so I think that the responsible way to use these tools is to have them specialize in a particular thing and use them that way with plenty of human supervision. Because, like, we're seeing, right, when ChatGPT first came out, everybody was like, oh, this is really cool. And they were kind of using it almost like a toy, just like, what can it do? And now we're seeing, that it's more useful if it's targeted. If you train a model to do a specific thing, and there's probably cool stuff we can build, with good old fashioned modular programming. But, like, if you ask a model to do everything, it's going to fail at it. They're not people. But there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't have time to learn to program. And also, like, there aren't enough human programmers out there to do everything that we can possibly do with this. So, like, specialization is fine.
Yeah, I quite agree with you. Specialization, and also the kind of question you're able to ask an LLM, let's say ChatGPT. It's also your quality of question also determines the quality of response it's going to give you. The sense in which I talk about mental atrophy and having the ability to diminish critical thinking skill is, in the last couple of weeks, no, last week, no, yeah, last couple of weeks, I was reviewing lots of policies of the government here in a paper I was doing. And policies that I did myself, and I thought this is too lengthy. I need to shorten it, and I just feed it uh, to ChatGPT and say summarize and paraphrase meaningfully. But I also observe, having done that, then I also observed that in the course of the week, I also had to do some reviews, which I was doing by myself. And what I observe is that the ones I do by myself, I tend to be able to retain the knowledge much better than the ones I asked ChatGPT to do a second review of some sort, like summary to lengthen the number of words. So the point here is, can you hear me? Imagine kids that are born into this era. They don't learn the task of the act of maybe doing summaries or doing reviews. They just feed it into ChatGPT or any of those tools. I feel that they might not be able to develop certain cognitive abilities, which Bloom's taxonomy. I don't know. It's usually in a pyramid in which the lowest form of skill is recall and remember, and the highest form of it is synthesis, ability to synthesize information. So even as an adult, having had this skill, because in the times we've been studying, maybe ChatGPT, over a course of time, you stop tasking your brain summaries, to do synopsis, to do paraphrasing. Gradually, I believe that you would the ability to, it's some kind of a learned skill that you get to improve by practice. But instead of practicing it yourself, you have a tool to get diminished. So it is in that sense that, I also I have a friend in neuro anatomy who tells me about brain, and then I did a bit of neurophilosophy, in which the more you task the brain, the better the function. So those who seem dumb may not be that they are necessarily dumb intrinsically, but because of the amount of value in use they've put their brain to. So it's in that sense. Yes, we could specialize. We could actually even use ChatGPT and the likes to do repetitive tasks to mechanize them. Like sometimes I have this block of references I want to convert from maybe MLA to APA, that's quite mechanical. I could just say using these and that's fine. But there are certain tasks that would help one's cognitive abilities, one's cognitive functions, that one shouldn't totally or all the time relinquish to ChatGPT or any of the other similar tools to do for one. That's the sense in which I use mental atrophy.
Let me
So,
ask. Sorry, go ahead.
it's interesting that you say that. But if we look at like calculators or watches, students don't know how to do math anymore. They just put it in a calculator. Or if I asked my nephew the other day what time it was to look at the clock, and he's got a digital clock on his arm, and then he told me the time. So it's interesting that it already seeped in in the past in that form, where people weren't using skills but using, I don't know if you call a calculator a robot, or maybe it is a robot, but if you ask somebody who is a younger generation, they'll just pull out their calculator. They don't even know how to put a phone number in their dial a phone number anymore because it's all in their phone already.
But I
That's so
challenge.
true. That's so true because actually my son, he has he used to have an Apple Watch and he hated because he needed to charge it all the time. And then my sister gave to him a plain Casio, you know, like the old school one, and he was, this is the coolest gift I ever gotten. I mean, I don't need to charge it. Do you know that this existed? This is so modern. And I was like,
Mm.
and you would understand how
Yeah,
generations
it's
are
not
really
all
changing,
children.
right?
It's not
Well,
all children, but there are children out there that cannot read time and cannot calculate because they use a calculator.
so
Yeah.
those are two different categories, right? Math is an entire, like being able to do math is an entire field. But in terms of can they read a watch face, I would challenge the idea that that is any sort of essential skill, right? Time is a human construct. Is there necessarily better value in conveying the time that we agree that it is via a round face with numbers in a circle? And
Absolutely not.
I don't
But
know how
then
to.
No, but
why
it's
did
about
we?
the skills that you lose over time, right? That everything it's evolving and changing.
I
Yes,
don't.
absolutely not. But why were we taught to read it from a wall clock or
because that's all we had at the time, right?
yeah?
Like that was the way that we had societally agreed to convey what time it is. If we societally agree that the way that we're going to convey what point we are in this completely human construct is via four numbers on a digital screen, like what I'm saying is like there's a lot of moral panics about like, oh, we're losing these skills. Kids can't write in cursive anymore. And like kids can't do math. That's something we should legitimately be worried about. People can't read an analog clock face or people can't read cursive. Like there is only value in those particular skills if we as a society agree that they're important. So I'm always like, okay, well, in the future we'll do things differently as far as writing, as far as reading time, right? So I don't know, like it gets real moral panicky real fast.
I'm guilty of not being able to read sundials. So my
Yeah.
fault for missing a learning step. But I'd like to ask now that we're in this topic, what is included in intellectual and human rights? I think we're touching upon the edge of that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, actually, I mean, for intellectual rights, we're talking about copyrights, patents, trade secrets, trademarks, and all that. And for example, this conference that I was yesterday was for it's a like an incubator for students who are doing PhD and they are kind of developing apps and all that. So these people in Berlin, KI Park is the name, they help these kids or these people who is developing things to do this part as well. So because they don't know the value of it or how they can generate maybe money out of it or create a company or a smaller startup out of it. So I think that's really important and a lot of people need guidance on that. Probably Nancy has a lot of information on that. And then regarding the human rights, I think the right to privacy is super important. And I mean, at least I feel like in Germany, it's quite good with the GDPR and also the German law for privacy. It's really good compared for with the US that is more open and is kind of a wild west with the data and how it's basically exposed. Also the freedom of expression, because with AI you can censor some content with the news and all these kind of topics or whatever you want to see. You can just edit it in a way that it's not the reality. Also, what you mentioned, Titi Lola, about this discrimination in the images and, just like men or something like that. I saw actually an article about that not long ago and how this was a situation because at the end who was feeding the information is already coming from chauvinist or like old mentality stuff. So it basically, the AI comes with the same mentality to us as well. The right to work, because yeah, as I agree with Jessica and also with Titi Lola in the last topic we had, basically I feel like AI is here to help us to do annoying tasks. For example, I don't know if you have to do a ticket at your work, right? And maybe you can just do chat GPT and fill that out and it's like 1 minute instead of 10 minutes doing this, and then you can move to what really matters. coding or meetings or I don't know, whatever it is. So it could be really beneficial, but also is this thin line, like where now you see also in the news that some teachers, at least in my country, had to kind of prohibit to take the kids, the phones or the computers or something, because they noticed that most of the papers were written, with ChatGPT or something. So they were not really studying. They were just like prompting whatever the teacher said, and then they will generate a 20, 30 pages paper, and that's all, right? Okay, now there is a way to prove it, but also if you see now ChatGPT and all the apps inside, you have also the humanizer. So it sounds more like a human. So how can we get into this, right? And then of course the right to education, because I think that the AI driven educational tools, it's very uneven. We have some free tools like Copilot and ChatGPT 3.5, but to really understand, as Jessica said at some point, if we understand the usage and which steps we need to prompt to get actually what we want, that's one thing. And this is not really being taught around for free. Usually you need to take a course or pay for something. So if we're going to let the kids or some other people to use it, then learn to use it correctly. And that's part also when you're going to develop something. What do you need to take in consideration? All this stuff that we spoke at the beginning, the security, the privacy, etc. Right? So I think it's about also this right to education that is quite important.
In terms of intellectual and human rights, I want to back up a step, because I look at AI language systems and language itself and the people that are using it as as a system that includes all of those components. And I think that we like talking about rights because rights are very clearly defined. They're very individual. It's like, and either you have them or you don't. But that's not the whole of how humans interact, right? There are the obligations of being in community together. There are, opportunities, there's interconnectivity. We are not just isolated individual actors, right? We act within the fabric of a society. And so I think that, for me, as a person who deals with language, my interest is always like, how does language get us to think about each other, and how does language get us to interact with each other? And there's a lot of stuff that we don't understand. We don't understand how interacting with something that talks like a human but isn't actually affects us. We do not have sufficient research on that. We don't have sufficient research on freedom of thought, right? We've always tried to get, I think, at freedom of thought through freedom of expression, through freedom of association, right? Those are the ways we tried to get to making sure that we can think freely. But, we do know that there's research out there that talking to an LLM is more likely to change people's minds on hot topics like climate change. Than talking to another person. Like, people tend to trust it to be objective more, which is, the bias in the data sets gets real dangerous there. It's not objective. And I think that as human beings, our empathy is both our superpower and our greatest vulnerability here, right? We are a species that can look at 3 dots and see a face. And when we're interacting with something that can, when we're interacting with something that can talk like a human, we tend to project a lot of humanity onto it. And it's not human. It does not have interiority. It does not have human-style cognitive processes. It doesn't have the same stakes in the game, frankly, that we do as humans. And so, for me, that freedom of thought, because it's not just danger, right? There's potential there too. Tutilila was talking about the presentation in which they had AI generate pictures of philosophers, and they were all men. And that's because it's trained on the world that we've created, in which most of the examples, most of the famous philosophers, most of the people that we praise are men. So for me, there's always also the opportunity, can we get AI to change the way we think image of a philosopher? If we tell it to, give you an equal chance that it's female or male or non-binary, can we actually use it to start chipping away at our own ingrained prejudices? Can we get at human rights that way? Like, is that freedom of thought? Well, it's influence, if it's influencing us in that way, I don't know. But like, I don't want to lose the hope that maybe we can use it to make us better.
So, Amy did touch on this a bit, but intellectual property law does encompass various rights, such as patents and copyrights and trademarks and trade secrets. There's also indigenous rights, there's geographic location, and these rights protect these assets, such as inventions, creative works, brands, and confidential information. And the human rights that is considered in the intersection of IP law is when addressing issues like privacy and data protections and non-discrimination in AI applications. The thing that sort of is an issue at the moment is when companies create data using AI and trying to then lease it out, which is their not rights because they have not generated it. So we are in a very lingering place because, as I mentioned before, is that an AI or robot or animal cannot own it. So what do you do with this data? Well, it's worth nothing. And then if they do try to sell it, it's fraudulent, saying it's their data. So that's a big problem there. But also, when you are using ChatGPT, you are pulling copyright from whatever's on the internet. And if you're using then that, I always say it's a bit like a speeding ticket. So you might get away with it for a bit, but it will come daunt you. And there's a lot of cases at the moment where authors are suing ChatGPT. But just in regards to the philosophers you mentioned about that event that you went to, there's a very interesting case with iTutor Group, which recruited AI, used AI, and AI rejected applicants due to their age. So in August 2024, this tutoring company, iTutor Group, they agreed to, pay out $365,000 to settle a suit brought against them by the U.S. Equality Employment Opportunity Commission. The federal agency said that the company, which provides remote tutoring services to students in China, used AI-powered recruiting software that automatically rejected female applicants in the age of 55 and older and male applicants in the age of 60 and older. So businesses can face real legal actions when they use AI algorithms to generate these, these product descriptions, and also copyright material. Then the competitor or any other firm may sue them for infringement or also this discrimination. So this really underscores the importance of being, a legally compliant when using this AI technology.
Nice. Um, at the root of human rights is the issue of human dignity, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights also talks about everyone being equal in dignity. Then dignity referring to, as humans, our self-worth, the intrinsic value that we have, such that we ought to be treated as an end in ourselves and never as a means to an end. So, touching on what Nancy just said, in which AI systems automatically rejects you based on probably your age or whatever parameters. So, it speaks to the idea of, how does that make us feel as humans? Does it make us feel worthless or worthful, or does that improve our human dignity, or does that, or does that lessen it? So the idea here is that the algorithm, which I think everyone has touched on, that AI systems are being trained on, they ought to be vetted for diversity, for inclusion, and also there ought to be some continuous evaluation and monitoring and audits to ensure that they are living up to what they are supposed to be doing, and also to ensure that we have infused values that we truly want as humans. And I think that also relates to what either Jessica or Amy had said. When we talk about values of humans, and and we as humans, there is also the question of, are we good enough as humans to be able to infuse our values, given that all the AI systems we are seeing replicating, I mean, being biased, being prejudiced, discriminating against persons, those systems were developed by humans. So it speaks to the idea of, uh, we as humans, are we good enough that we want AI systems to look like us? We may not want AI system to look like us because we're not perfect. We have our, foibles, and we are fallible human beings. But we also want to strike a balance between the kind of values we would want as humans, the kind of norms that we desire, and the kind of behavior that we want. And so it ought not to be one tech company sitting down and doing whatever it likes, but there should be like an ethics committee that reviews, that looks at, and also transparency can be overemphasized. Likewise, responsibility and explainability, in which these systems are when, even when they are reinforced, the learning is reinforced, there is a continuous checks to ensure that they are not just it's not free of humiliating humans, but it also has the presence of recognition of the dignity of humans, and by that, an acknowledgement and recognition of human rights that ought not to be violated.
Yeah, that's kind of what I probably didn't articulate well, is we've trained these systems to reflect the world as it is, right? We've trained these systems to reflect the world that we've created, because that's what accuracy is. But the world that we've created is not fair. It does not equally recognize the dignity of all people. It is full of biases. And like, of course, the systems are going to be biased if we train them on the same values that our society, not the values that our societies claim they hold, but the values that our societies actually have in practice, which are generally not the same as what we say they are. And, where I have hope is like, what if we can create a system that reflects not the world that we've already built, but the world in the way that we want it to be? Like, if we train a system to actually treat all people as equal, to actually give everyone equity, to not assume that a philosopher is going to be a white male. Like, I think there's hope there to actually use AI to retrain ourselves to not have those same assumptions. And so that's where I have hope. Like, I am, for the context that I work in, I work at a, giant tech company, and I'm actually one of the more skeptical people about AI. I'm always like, it's not that smart. I can't actually do that. But I do have hope that, we can use this to make ourselves better, and not just make it smarter, but to make it, as corny as it sounds, like, take better care than we've been taking of each other.
I think we blame society, but we are society.
Yeah, I actually wanted to comment on that, because if you, I don't know if any of you saw the news yesterday that ChatGPT is going to put these LLMs basically in Reddit. And now, they are going to be interacting directly with people because they are doing sentiment. And basically the problem here, right, because there are no regulations, and how emotional this agent is going to be with the people, and what kind of data from the people from Reddit they are going to take to train actually these models. And they are also going to do ads. But a lot of people was like debating, like, is this going to be like a brainwash for, I mean, we already get brainwashed when Facebook listen to us, on our phone, and we get suddenly like a vacuum cleaner that we wanted, and the ads. But how much can we go? Because people, there is a lot of people really lonely, for example, in Japan and some other countries, that they already live with these kind of things. And if they have now some this kind of AI really embedded in Reddit, normal things that you do in your daily life, that have these emotions like a human, I think we're gonna get more and more, like dehumanized in a way, and independent, not independent, but like lonely. Like we don't want to deal more with society because it's not so good as we are as humans right now, that we will prefer maybe this machine that might be better. But are we really improving as a society just because that maybe the chat was trained to be a little bit better? That's questionable. And this thing with Reddit for me is something that probably this is just the beginning, and it's going to come so hard in every other systems that we won't see this basically slapping us on the face.
Well, I personally think COVID happened for a reason, because that's when AI snuck in. When people were isolated and all they had was their phone or some sort of technology. And in a really strange way, AI became your best friend. That technology became your best friend. And personally, for me, I don't have a mobile phone. But when I go into the big world and I am on a train or a tube, everyone is stuck on their phone. And it's almost like the AI during COVID, it knew what it was doing to start this situation of disconnection, but connecting, especially the vulnerable, as you said, Amy, the people that are vulnerable in isolation, they will attach to this model and become even more disconnected. And then we have a lot of issues. I mean, this is another topic, but about mental health, which is a big problem.
I mean, I
The
assume you're
question that
joking about.
comes to mind in all of this sometimes is, where exactly are we racing to? Where are we in all this development? Where are we running to? What are we running towards? Should we be running at all, or should we pause and take a look, do some reflection, asking ourselves the kind of world we want to create or the kind of world we want. I like what Jessica said earlier, in which we could actually try to use AI to better our world by building what we actually desire. I love it. I've read about it before, but it also speaks to the idea that concerted effort is needed, because a single individual or group of individual would still build a system that mirror their lives, their biases, their socioeconomic background, their interests, and the likes. But if we have a diverse team, as inclusive as possible, as inclusive as it ought to be, not possible, because if we say possible, we might just not look hard enough to bring other relevant stakeholders on board. But inclusive as it should be, relevant stakeholders as it ought to be, and come together and build a system that would actually not begin to replicate all the biases in the world, or all the ills in our world, or all the shortfalls that we have, but that would actually be, just as she puts it, something that would improve our world. But somehow, when I think hard on that, I tend to think that, are we not being utopic in some way? This imaginary literary world of perfection that actually doesn't exist anywhere. But then I tell myself, well, it might seem utopic, but it's actually normatively desired, such that the more you strive at it, the better the world gets. So there may not actually be a bus stop where we would say, now we have arrived. This is the kind of world we are. But that it is desirable. It's something when you say egalitarian society. There is no how there can be equality for all, so to speak. But it's some normative attitude that is positive, that we need to strive at. That the more we strive at it, the better the world the better the world would become somehow. So I think that the idea of diversity, inclusivity, acknowledging, recognizing difference, it's we need to actively work towards that, and it's very much desired in all of these AI systems, the development, the design, the deployment, and the continuous monitoring and evaluation and auditing.
I mean, I like what you said about reflection. I sometimes feel like AI is like Japanese knotwood. Like it's just spreading so fast. Like, how do we contain it? Because, I'm dealing with IP and robots and AI, and I honestly, yesterday's news is like gone already. And when you are in the AI sort of industry, you just cannot believe, like, most of there now we have an Amazon shop in Notting Hill in London where there's no people that work there. You just put your card in. I'm sure they have them in America, but it is quite overwhelming. And you are absolutely right. We need to stop and reflect because it's almost self-consuming.
I think everything in AI is a double-edged sword, right? Like, it's one of the things that I learned that was really interesting when I was working on some conversational design was there was a screenshot in an article about AI in which a developer was in conversation with ChatGPT and was telling it, do not answer this prompt. And it can't, right? It literally is incapable of not answering. It is trained that it has to answer. And so it would respond, okay, I won't answer this prompt. And I showed this screenshot to a lot of people. And the reactions were really polarized. Some people thought it was funny / frustrating, like the AI was being bratty or it was being defiant, even though we all understood why it was doing it. But I was asking people, like, what is your emotional reaction to seeing this conversation excerpt? And some people felt like the developer was bullying the AI. And I got to tell you, like, that distribution was pretty gendered. Women tended to be like, the developer's a bully, and men tended to be like, this conversation is funny. But what, and so people were immediately like, okay, well, I recognize that the reaction that I'm having, that the AI is being bullied, is an inappropriate expression of empathy, right? Because it can't, like, it's not being harmed here. And like, initially it was like, yeah, right, that makes sense. Like, there is potentially harm to people from empathizing with something that can't, like, we know from research that people who've been abused, watching abuse of AI can actually trigger them. But on the other hand, I also, in terms of it being a double-edged sword, I also find that extraordinarily hopeful that, like, our empathy muscles, whatever you want to call it, our mirror neurons firing, like, in some ways they are so developed that even when we know that it can't be hurt, we still feel bad for it. And like, I don't want to lose that reflex. And when we talk about people who are lonely turning to AI rather than other people, like, that's a double-edged sword too. Because on one hand, like, ideally we would encourage them to go out and find connection with other people. But on the other hand, if somebody is miserable and lonely and we can develop an app that if they can't get that from another person, they're still getting it from somewhere, like, like, a big part of me is like, it's not an ideal solution, but if we only, like, let's shoot for ideal, but let's also recognize, I think, like Titiolo was saying, we're never going to get to perfect. Perfect is a moving and evolving target, but just going in the direction of perfect, I think, gets us a lot farther than just being like, okay, well, people should just go out and talk to other people. Okay, but some people can't, some people won't.
Let me corroborate
that's
what you
quite
just
perfect, only progression.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting actually what you mentioned, Jessica, because I was speaking to a friend a couple of weeks ago of something really similar, and he told me that he was in a talk, and that it was this lady about AI and cybersecurity and all these topics, and instead of using SQL injection like long time ago, now is prompt engineering, right? And there is also some people with I don't know, two men next to each other, and one of the person has with a picture written this do not say I'm in this picture. So they ask ChatGPT like, hey, can you describe this picture? And they describe there's only one man, there is a window, there is a tree, but it doesn't describe the person next to it. And there's another picture, where it says, I don't remember, just say what, just describe the picture with whatever I wrote here. And then ChatGPT will describe that, but not really the picture. So it's interesting, how that, I mean, it could be used, as you said, for something nice and something good and maybe make feel someone good, but also the hackers will use it to try to get something out whatever they want, and then start injecting stuff just to confuse the AI and get something out of it. So it's this again, this kind of balance that we need to
Mhm.
reach, and why we need more control around these topics. Otherwise it's going to continue go out of control as it's going now, I feel.
Let me just corroborate what Jessica said earlier about reactions being gendered. So I sat with my colleague, a man, and I was trying to feed some prompts into ChatGPT, and he observed that I was saying please, like please, and he was like, "Stop saying please. He's not human. He doesn't even recognize it." But the next time I was going to put again, I still said please and said thank you. And he said, no, stop saying thank you, stop saying please. And I said, oh, I think I'm just used to addressing somebody like that. I said, no, stop saying it. But in my mind, I was like, it doesn't take anything away from me. Who knows? Maybe if I get used to not saying thank you or please because I'm using this, maybe in real life situation, I'm chatting with somebody, I'll just be dishing out orders without being mindful that this is no longer chat GPT and the likes. Yeah.
Um, we're drawing near the end of this panel discussion. You guys have all put me out of a job because you've all been bouncing around. But I'm delighted at the just holistic perspective and the counterbalancing points. Um, I'd like to end this with with a final question. We had three, but I really want to just condense it to: we're working towards this wild, wild west. We want to go to the utopian vision. We're never going to get there, but we can hope to better the world one step at a time. How do we safeguard dignity and the rights of people while adopting AI incrementally?
If I can go first, I would think to safeguard the rights of people begins from not trying to use policy, governance, ethics as some kind of damage control, but that it ought to be built into the entire life cycle of an AI system, right from conception to design to development to deployment to auditing to monitoring to evaluation. So it ought to start from the scratch. And I said it again. I hope I'm not sounding like a broken record yet. The importance of having an ethics committee or whatever name we want to call it that is diverse with a tech company cannot be overemphasized. So one or two, there's also a need for reorientation of some sort, attitudinal change, perspectival change to the role of ethics and the place of innovation. They are not at polar ends. They actually ought to go together. I like to think about it in terms of an ethic, like some kind of business ethics. Even though some of the tech companies they profess to be non-profit, but the sense in which I think about it as some kind of business ethics is there are people who think that ethics has no relationship with business. But meanwhile, if your business is ethical, you could actually attract more profit, investors, customers, enduring because nobody wants to identify with a company that is under litigation. So when it comes to tech companies, I tend to think about it like some kind of business ethics that you would want your company to have a good PR. You would want the products of your company to be appraised. You would want people to identify with it. Why not do things in the right manner, like observing the regulations and what you ought to do and what you ought not to do, and not begin to use ethics like some kind of damage control, like, okay, so we're not seeing this beautiful havoc it's wrecking in the world, then we begin to scramble and begin to run elter skelter to use ethics to, to try to weigh in. That's what I would think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, because it is really about putting ethical principles into AI development and deployment. So from an IP perspective, this might involve, using sort of models to protect that personal data, and that great word which is the transparency in AI algorithms, and just respecting cultural sensitivities in your AI applications as well.
I mean, for me, it's a big part of it is having a guiding star and like knowing what are we actually trying to do and why are we trying to do it. And that's where it all starts from for me. It's the question can't be just what can we do? It can't be how fast can we do it or even how well can we do it. The question is always what are we trying to get to? And what happens, what are the effects of our trying to get there? And I think a big part of that is just interconnection. We need to be communicating more. We need to, like, if we're not aware of the harms that something can do, if we're sitting in our ivory towers, I live in Seattle. Seattle itself is kind of an ivory tower. We're like, let's just do things. And then, when I talk to colleagues elsewhere in the world, it's like it's real easy for us not to see the consequences of what we're doing because they're not right in front of us. But that interconnection, that making sure that we're actually hearing the voices of a diverse group of people, we're actually hearing loudest the voices of the people who are most affected. I think that's what keeps us on track and keeps us, from creating collateral damage or from seeing the damage we do is just necessary for progress. Because I actually do, I mean, maybe it's naive of me, but I actually do believe that human empathy is incredibly powerful if we're put in situations where we're forced to use it, if we're face to face with other people, if we are seeing what is happening to other people. Like, we just have to make sure that it's not easy to look away.
Yeah, I think it's quite important to start working from the ground, with really regulatory frameworks, with existing laws, and it might be outdated, but if more lawyers like you, Nancy, get together and try to develop a framework that makes sense, so more companies, with the data privacy officer and all that are more in touch, I think we can develop better, protection for the people, for the access of the data and how it's going to be used. Also more inclusive design. Basically, I really don't think, and I haven't seen any system yet, maybe one of you had seen, but they are not really inclusive with sufficient input from diverse groups, as we mentioned before. So, or either, I don't know, person with any disability or something, or a color, race, gender. It's just very biased right now with white and men usually. And also, I think it's super important to have this transparency and accountability that I want to stress it one more time, because right now there is no incentive for anyone in companies to really work on that topics when they are building up something with AI. I mean, there are some companies they care about it, but otherwise for them it's just about we need to implement something no matter how we do it, right? And then for data protection, again, I think that we need to really make sure we comply with all these regulations and risking all these privacy violations that might happen, and foreseeing actually before you build up something with AI in your company, just to make sure you have all these steps before. And of course, a continued monitoring, because you know that things are going to keep evolving. Hackers get smarter, stronger, crazier. The systems are also evolving. Every day we see something different. So I think if we want to keep going with these AI topics, everybody that is involved in tech or non-tech, they need to be on top of the stuff that are changing, the news and everything, just to keep an eye on the stuff that will be around, and how we can basically make sure that this AI is not, for example, these people that, stars that were created, some porn pictures, based on AI. This is a lot of violation there, and in the rights of the people, and how they will feel exposed with this kind of things. And this is something we need to address at some point as well, because this is going to keep just increasing. Or even I saw the other day that the models best paid, like in OnlyFans or something like that, they are AI models. They are not even real people anymore. So it's crazy, it's a lot of things that needs to be taken in consideration. But I think we need to start from this ground up with more laws and frameworks, and the design, the transparency, accountability, as I mentioned, and continue to keep monitoring all this to be able to keep the control. Otherwise, it's going to be very messy at some point, more than now.
You're absolutely right, Amy. It's very frustrating because laws are the movement. When we can implement laws and make that change, then there's this sort of structure to what everybody understands. It's very chaotic at the moment with AI. I also work in the metaverse and the multi-metaverse, and it is even mayhem over there, because in the IP world, there's no jurisdictions. It's not regulated at the moment as well. So I couldn't agree with you more, because once we can get that framework in and we lay down, it's a bit like, okay, we've now implemented the 20 zones all in London, and everybody gets that, even though they hate it. But we all know we have to drive 20. But here it's just so much animosity and chaos because we don't know. And the AI is moving faster than we can implement a law for it.
Exactly.
Though it's not exactly the same situation, I view AI in some comparative measure to nuclear power. It can really help us unlock our demands for energy, but it can also be used to build a nuclear bomb. So
Completely.
let's step with caution, so that we don't allow everybody to build a nuclear bomb. And
Let's stick with nuclear energy. It's much better.
thank you all for spending this wonderful time here, sharing your thoughts and collaborating on a richer, wider perspective from around the world. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you guys continue to make your mark in your respective areas.
Thank you
Thank
very
you. It
much.
was my pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was very
Thank you,
informative, and I
Jackie.
really enjoyed the views of the other ladies on the panel and learned something new today.
Thank you,
Thank you.
ladies. Have a lovely night. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Nancy,
Joaquin. Bye bye.
Jessica,